On a crisp Monday morning in October, an elegant black woman stood at the teller counter of Pinnacle Financial's flagship branch in downtown Manhattan. Despite her composed demeanor, shoulders squared, chin slightly raised, her eyes betrayed a flicker of disbelief as she was surrounded by bank employees whose expressions ranged from indifferent to openly disdainful. None of them recognized her. This was Olivia Marshall. The glass and marble lobby gleamed under recessed lighting that cast soft halos on the polished floor. Outside, yellow cabs and sleek black town cars streamed past, their occupants rushing toward the promises of another work week. Inside, time seemed to slow as Olivia placed her debit card and driver's license on the counter. "I'd like to withdraw $2,000 from my premium account," she said, her voice measured and calm. The teller, a young man with slicked-back hair and a pinstripe suit that seemed a size too large, barely glanced at her ID before sliding it back. "I'm sorry, but we'll need additional verification for a withdrawal of this size," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "Company policy." Olivia nodded patiently. "Of course. What would you like me to provide?" As she waited for his response, Olivia's mind traveled back 25 years to a very different counter in very different circumstances. 25 years earlier, Olivia Marshall stood behind another counter, wearing a crisply ironed uniform and a name tag that read trainee. Her natural hair was pulled back into a tight bun. "More professional," her supervisor had said, and her shoes pinched her toes slightly, a small discomfort she was determined to ignore. It was her first day at Pinnacle Financial, and at 22, fresh out of college with a business degree and a mountain of student debt, Olivia felt both terrified and exhilarated. Growing up in Harlem with a single mother who worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, Olivia had watched her mother count every penny, stretch every dollar, and still come up short at the end of most months. The financial system had always seemed like a distant fortress, designed to keep people like them out. "I'm going to learn it from the inside," Olivia had promised her mother. "And one day, I'll change it." Her mother had smiled, lines crinkling around her eyes. "Baby, you can do anything you set your mind to. Just remember where you came from." Now standing behind the teller counter, Olivia straightened her shoulders and prepared to greet her first customer. "Good morning. Welcome to Pinnacle Financial. How may I help you today?" she asked, the scripted greeting already feeling natural on her lips. The customer, an older white man in an expensive suit, barely looked at hers as he pushed a deposit slip across the counter. "Just make it quick," he muttered. Olivia processed the transaction efficiently, thanked the man, and moved on to the next customer. By lunchtime, she had served over 30 people, and by closing, her feet were aching and her face felt stiff from maintaining her professional smile. But she had done it. Her first day in the financial world. In the staff room, as she collected her things to leave, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "You did well today." Olivia turned to see Eleanor Richardson, the branch manager, a stern-looking woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp blue eyes. "Thank you, Ms. Richardson. I'm eager to learn." Eleanor studied her for a moment. "Most trainees are just here for the paycheck. They don't care about banking." "I'm not most trainees," Olivia replied, her voice quiet but firm. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted. "No, I don't think you are. Be here at 7:30 tomorrow. I want to show you something before we open." The next morning, Olivia arrived at 7:15, finding Eleanor already at her desk, reviewing reports. "Sit," Eleanor said, gesturing to the chair opposite her. "Do you know what these are?" She pushed a stack of papers across the desk. Olivia scanned them quickly. "Loan applications and their decline notices. Correct. Now what do you notice about them? Olivia read more carefully, her brow furrowing. They're all from the same neighborhood. Harlem, my neighborhood. She looked up. And they're all declined for the same reason: insufficient creditworthiness. Eleanor nodded. Despite many of them having stable jobs, decent savings, and good payment histories with other institutions. So what does that tell you? Olivia's heart beat faster. That the system is biased. The system, Eleanor replied, leaning forward, is made of people. People with biases, assumptions, and prejudices. If you want to change the system, you have to rise within it. Understand? Olivia nodded slowly. Is that why you're showing me this? A ghost of a smile touched Eleanor's lips. I've been watching you since you applied. You have something, Olivia. Determination, intelligence. But most importantly, you have perspective. You see what others miss because they've never had to look. She gathered the papers and returned them to a folder. I'm retiring in 3 years. By then, I want you to be ready to take my place. Ms. Richardson, I've only been here 1 day, and you're already asking the right questions. That's more than most do in an entire career. Eleanor stood. Now get to your station. We open in 20 minutes. As Olivia walked to her counter, she felt a new sense of purpose settling into her bones. Eleanor had seen something in her, something worth nurturing, and Olivia was determined not to waste the opportunity. The next 5 years were a blur of late nights, weekend study sessions, and countless cups of coffee. Olivia moved from teller to loan officer, mastering the intricacies of credit evaluation, risk assessment, and customer relations. She enrolled in night classes, working toward her MBA while maintaining a full-time position at the bank. Eleanor proved to be both a demanding mentor and a fierce ally. She pushed Olivia harder than anyone else, critiquing her work with unflinching honesty, but also defending her from the subtle hostilities of colleagues who saw her rapid advancement as undeserved. They think I'm showing favoritism, Eleanor remarked one evening as they reviewed quarterly reports. They don't realize I'm twice as hard on you because you're capable of twice as much. By the time Eleanor retired, Olivia had completed her MBA and was ready to step into the role of branch manager. At 27, she was the youngest branch manager in Pinnacle Financial's history and the first Black woman to hold the position. The day she moved into Eleanor's, now her, office, Olivia found a small wrapped package on the desk. Inside was a sleek fountain pen with an inscription, "Change it from within, ER." Olivia's tenure as branch manager was marked by innovation and inclusion. She initiated community financial literacy programs, streamlined the loan application process to reduce subjective decision-making, and actively recruited staff from diverse backgrounds. Under her leadership, the branch's performance metrics soared, not despite these changes, but because of them. 3 years later, when a regional director position opened up, Olivia's application raised eyebrows at corporate headquarters. At 30, she would be overseeing 12 branches across 3 states. Many executives argued she lacked the necessary experience. Experience isn't just about time served, countered Thomas Wells, the outgoing CEO, during the board meeting. It's about results delivered, and Marshall's results speak for themselves. With Wells's support, Olivia secured the position, relocating to Boston to take on her new responsibilities. The move was bittersweet. She was leaving her mother and Harlem behind, but both urged her forward. "This is what we dreamed of," her mother said, eyes shining with pride. "You're changing things, just like you promised." As regional director, Olivia faced her most significant challenges yet. Some branch managers resented taking direction from someone younger, and though never stated explicitly, someone black and female. Others paid lip service to her initiatives while continuing old practices behind closed doors. Olivia addressed resistance with a blend of firmness and diplomacy. She tied performance evaluations directly to implementation of new policies. She recognized and rewarded those who embraced change, and when necessary, she wasn't afraid to replace those who couldn't or wouldn't adapt. By her 5th year as regional director, Olivia's region consistently outperformed all others in customer satisfaction, loan approvals across demographic groups, and overall profitability. Her success caught the attention of the board, and at 35 she was promoted to Executive Vice President of Retail Banking, overseeing all branch operations nationwide. The corporate offices in Manhattan's financial district were a far cry from the Harlem branch where she'd started. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city. Executive assistants arranged her schedule, and senior managers sought her approval for major decisions. Yet amid the trappings of success, Olivia remained grounded in her purpose. She kept a photo on her desk, not of herself with celebrities or politicians who now sought her company, but of herself and her mother standing outside their old apartment building in Harlem. "Never forget where you came from," she would remind herself each morning, touching the frame lightly before beginning her day. It was during this period that Olivia met James Chen, a brilliant financial analyst who had been hired to overhaul the bank's risk assessment models. Their first meeting was contentious. James argued that her inclusive lending practices increased risk, while Olivia maintained that traditional models incorrectly categorized certain communities as high risk due to historical biases. "Data doesn't lie," James insisted. "No, but the people who interpret it can be blind to their own assumptions," Olivia countered. Their professional disagreement evolved into mutual respect, and eventually into something more personal. On their first date, over dinner at a small Vietnamese restaurant far from the corporate towers, they discovered shared experiences as outsiders in an industry that still celebrated conformity. "My father wanted me to be a doctor," James confessed. "When I told him I was going into finance, he said I'd always be seen as the Asian guy who's good with numbers." Olivia nodded. "And I'll always be the black woman who must have been a diversity hire." "Yet here we are," James said, raising his glass, "proving them wrong every day." 3 years later, they married in a small ceremony in Central Park, with Olivia's mother and James's parents as their only guests. Together, they balanced demanding careers with a growing commitment to community work, establishing a foundation that provided scholarships and mentoring to students from underrepresented backgrounds interested in finance. At 40, Olivia was appointed Chief Operating Officer of Pinnacle Financial, second only to CEO Richard Hamilton. The appointment was not without controversy. Several board members questioned whether she had the necessary experience, the same argument that had followed her throughout her career, despite her consistent track record of success. "I'm concerned about client perception," one board member said during the closed-door discussion. "Some of our highest-value customers are traditional in their expectations." "And what exactly do you mean by traditional?" asked Thomas Wells, now board chairman after his retirement as CEO. The boardroom fell silent, the unspoken bias hanging in the air. "If by traditional you mean racist or sexist," Wells continued, "then perhaps we should reconsider whether those are clients we want to retain. Marshall has generated more new high-value relationships in the past 5 years than anyone in this company's history. That's the only tradition I care about." As COO, Olivia worked closely with Richard Hamilton, a traditionalist who had risen through the ranks of investment banking. Their relationship was professional but strained, with Hamilton often resistant to Olivia's more progressive approaches to banking practices. "We're a financial institution, not a social welfare organization," he would say when she pushed for expansion into underserved communities or revised lending criteria. "We're a business that succeeds by identifying opportunities others miss," she would counter. "These communities represent untapped markets with enormous potential." Despite their differences, Hamilton could not argue with results. Under Olivia's direction, Pinnacle expanded its customer base significantly, particularly among younger clients and first-time banking families, demographics essential for long-term growth in an industry facing increasing competition from fintech startups. 5 years into her tenure as COO, Hamilton announced his plan to retire. The succession battle was fierce, with Olivia competing against Jonathan Winters, the chief financial officer and Hamilton's preferred candidate. The board was divided. Winters represented continuity and traditional banking values. Olivia represented innovation and expansion. The final vote was scheduled for a Friday morning in June. The night before the vote, Olivia sat alone in her office, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. She had come so far from that first day as a trainee. Had it been enough? Had she changed things from within, as Eleanor had advised? Or had she compromised too much along the way? Her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Whatever happens tomorrow, remember why you started, and remember that I believe in you, always." Olivia smiled, feeling a calm resolve settle over her. She had done everything she could. The rest was in the board's hands. The next morning, the boardroom was tense as Thomas Wells called the meeting to order. "We have 2 exceptional candidates for the position of Chief Executive Officer," he began. "Both have served Pinnacle with distinction. Both have vision for our future. The question before us is, whose vision will best serve not just our shareholders, but our customers, our employees, and the communities we operate in?" The debate lasted for hours, with passionate arguments on both sides. Finally, the vote was called. The room fell silent as Wells tallied the results. "By a vote of 7-6, he announced, "the board has elected Olivia Marshall as the next Chief Executive Officer of Pinnacle Financial." History had been made. Olivia Marshall became the first Black woman to lead one of the nation's largest banking institutions. The news made headlines across the financial world, with reactions ranging from celebration to skepticism to outright hostility. In her acceptance speech, Olivia acknowledged the significance of the moment, but focused primarily on her vision for the bank's future. "I accept this responsibility with profound gratitude and clear-eyed determination. Pinnacle Financial will continue to uphold the highest standards of fiscal responsibility and client service. But we will also lead the industry in demonstrating that inclusivity and profitability are not opposing forces. They are complementary strengths. I will ensure that every customer, every employee, and every community we serve experiences respect and excellence at the highest level. No exceptions." 3 months into her role as CEO, Olivia began to notice troubling patterns in customer satisfaction data. While overall ratings remained strong, there were significant discrepancies in service quality across branches, particularly for customers of color. During her weekly meeting with Sarah Johnson, the newly appointed Chief of Customer Experience, Olivia raised her concerns. "The aggregated data looks good," she observed, "but when we segment by demographics and branch location, there are clear disparities. What's happening on the ground?" Sarah hesitated. "We've received some complaints, mainly through our post-interaction surveys rather than formal channels. Many customers, especially those from minority groups, simply don't file official complaints. They just leave and take their business elsewhere," Olivia finished. Do we know why? The feedback is often vague. Poor service. Felt unwelcome. Too many questions. Nothing specific enough to trigger our standard protocols. Olivia leaned back in her chair, memories of her own early banking experiences surfacing. Because the offenses are subtle, a different tone, extra scrutiny, small indignities that accumulate over time. Sarah nodded. Exactly. And they're nearly impossible to capture in our current metrics. Then we need new metrics, Olivia decided. And in the meantime, I want to see for myself what's happening. The flagship branch in downtown Manhattan, managed by Rebecca Taylor, stood out in the data. On paper, its performance was exemplary. High transaction volumes, excellent new account openings, minimal reported incidents. But customer retention among minority clients told a different story. Ms. Taylor has been with us for 15 years, Sarah noted. She's consistently met or exceeded all performance targets. All the targets we measure, Olivia corrected. But if we're not measuring the right things, exceeding targets doesn't mean providing excellent service to all customers. That evening, as Olivia discussed her concerns with James over dinner in their Upper West Side apartment, he offered a suggestion. When I was consulting for retail chains, we used mystery shoppers to evaluate the actual customer experience. No advance warning, no special preparation by staff. Olivia considered this. A CEO mystery shop. It could work. She frowned. But I'm too recognizable now. My photo has been in too many press releases. James smiled. You'd be surprised how invisible you can become with the right adjustments. People see what they expect to see, and no one expects to see the CEO standing in line for a routine transaction. 2 days later, Olivia's executive assistant helped her develop a simple disguise. Casual clothes, minimal makeup, hair in its natural state rather than the straightened style she adopted for corporate settings, and non-prescription glasses. The transformation was subtle but effective, stripping away the markers of corporate power and wealth. Perfect, James said when she modeled the look at home. You look like myself, Olivia finished, just not the version they're used to seeing. She decided to visit 5 branches over the course of 2 weeks, starting with smaller locations before tackling the flagship branch. At each location, she observed the same patterns. White customers, particularly those who appeared affluent, received prompt, friendly service with minimal scrutiny. Customers of color, especially those dressed casually, faced longer wait times, additional questions, and an overall less welcoming experience. At 9:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, Olivia walked through the revolving doors of Pinnacle Financial's flagship branch. She had deliberately chosen understated attire, a simple navy blue hoodie, dark slacks, and a baseball cap. Her natural hair was neatly styled, her makeup minimal. She carried a well-maintained but non-designer leather handbag. To anyone looking, she was just an ordinary middle-class woman, not the CEO of the entire organization. The lobby was impressive, designed to convey stability and success. Marble floors gleamed under soft lighting, and comfortable seating areas featured leather chairs and mahogany tables. The teller counters were arranged in a semicircle, fronted by a sleek reception desk where a young woman directed customers to the appropriate service area. Olivia sat in the waiting area, pretending to check her phone while actually observing the customer service dynamics around her. What she witnessed in the first 15 minutes revealed more than 1,000 customer surveys ever could. A white businessman in an expensive suit walked in. Before he reached the counter, an employee greeted him with a beaming smile. "Good morning, sir. How can we help you today?" The man was escorted directly to a service desk, bypassing the queue entirely. A few minutes later, An elderly Asian couple entered. They were directed to take a number and wait. No smile, no warmth, just a finger pointing toward the seating area. A young white woman in casual clothing approached the quick service counter. The teller chatted amicably with her, asking about weekend plans. The transaction was completed in less than 2 minutes. Then a Hispanic man in a janitorial uniform stepped up to the counter. Suddenly, there were more questions, requests for multiple forms of identification, and a suspicious look from the teller. His simple cash withdrawal took nearly 10 minutes. Olivia continued to observe this pattern repeat 6 more times before she finally approached the teller counter herself. She felt a knot forming in her stomach. Not nervousness, but a familiar tension she hadn't experienced in years. It was the feeling of steeling herself for subtle indignities, preparing to be treated as less than, without showing how it affected her. It was a feeling she had hoped her years of work would have eliminated for customers by now. "Next, please," called a teller, a young man named Michael, according to his nameplate. Olivia stepped forward, placing her debit card and driver's license on the counter. "Good morning. I'd like to withdraw $5,000 from my account, please." Michael barely glanced at her ID before his expression shifted from neutral to faintly suspicious. "That's a large cash withdrawal, ma'am. May I ask what it's for?" Olivia maintained her composure. "Personal reasons." "I'm afraid I'll need more specifics for our records," Michael insisted, his tone becoming condescending. "Bank policy for large cash transactions." "I wasn't aware that customers needed to justify their withdrawals," Olivia replied evenly. "I've never been asked before." Michael's smile tightened. "Perhaps you don't usually withdraw such large amounts." In fact, Olivia knew there was no policy requiring customers to explain cash withdrawals under $10,000. The only requirement was to file a currency transaction report for the government, which didn't necessitate asking about the purpose of the transaction. "I'd like to speak to your manager, please," Olivia requested, keeping her voice calm. Michael hesitated, then picked up his phone. "Miss Taylor? I have a situation at counter 3. He lowered his voice, but Olivia could still hear him. "A woman wanting a large cash withdrawal but refusing to provide details." While waiting, Olivia noticed other employees watching her with varying degrees of concern and disdain. None of them recognized her. The branch had fallen unusually quiet, other transactions slowing as staff members became distracted by the developing situation. Rebecca Taylor emerged from her office, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, her blonde hair arranged in a perfect bob. Without acknowledging Olivia, she spoke directly to Michael. "What seems to be the problem?" "This customer wants to withdraw $5,000 cash, but won't state the purpose," Michael explained, emphasizing customer in a way that suggested he questioned whether Olivia truly belonged in that category. Rebecca turned to Olivia, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes cold. "Ma'am, we have procedures for unusual transactions. They're for your protection as well as the bank's." "Is $5,000 considered unusual?" Olivia asked. "And what specific procedure requires asking about the purpose of my withdrawal?" Rebecca's smile didn't reach her eyes. "We have discretion to question any transaction that appears out of pattern for the account holder." "And how would you know what's in pattern for me when your teller barely looked at my account?" Olivia countered. A flicker of annoyance crossed Rebecca's face. "Ma'am, if you're uncomfortable with our security measures, perhaps you'd prefer to bank elsewhere." The dismissal was so casual, so practiced, that Olivia realized this wasn't an isolated incident. This was Rebecca's standard response to customers she deemed difficult or undesirable. Olivia felt a surge of both anger and clarity. This moment, this exact interaction, was why she had worked so hard to reach the top. Not for the title or the corner office, but for the power to change experiences like this. "I think I'd prefer to see the policy in writing," Olivia said, her voice taking on a different quality now, calmer, more authoritative, along with the customer service guidelines that Pinnacle Financial expects its employees to follow. Rebecca's expression hardened. "Our policies are proprietary, not for general distribution. Now, if you're not willing to comply—" "Actually," Olivia interrupted, removing her glasses and cap, "I'm very familiar with our policies, all of them." Rebecca froze, confusion crossing her face as she began to recognize the woman standing before her. "Ms. Marshall? I didn't recognize you." The entire lobby fell silent. Michael, the teller, turned pale, his hand gripping the counter edge. "Clearly," Olivia replied, her voice carrying through the hushed space. "And that's precisely the problem, isn't it? When I'm Olivia Marshall, CEO, I receive one standard of service. But when I'm just another black woman in casual clothes, I'm treated with suspicion and disdain." Rebecca stammered, "This is a misunderstanding." "No, this is discrimination," Olivia corrected her. "And based on what I've observed for the past 30 minutes, it's systematic in this branch." She turned to address the now frozen staff members. "I've been sitting here watching as white customers receive warm welcomes while customers of color face unnecessary scrutiny. I've seen elderly Asian clients directed to wait while younger white clients are immediately assisted. I've watched a Hispanic man in work clothes questioned extensively for a simple transaction, while a white woman in similar circumstances breezed through." Olivia returned her attention to Rebecca. "In my office, tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Bring your detailed customer interaction records for the past 6 months, segmented by demographic data." She paused. "And your resignation letter." Rebecca blanched. "My resignation, but this isn't a single misjudgment, Ms. Taylor. This is a pattern of behavior that you've cultivated and permitted in this branch. It violates not only our explicit policies but the core values of this institution." Olivia's voice was firm but controlled. "You have until tomorrow to decide whether you'd prefer to resign or be terminated with cause." Turning to Michael, she added, "You'll meet with HR at 9 a.m. They'll determine appropriate remedial training or other actions." Without waiting for responses, Olivia addressed the entire branch. "Pinnacle Financial exists to serve all customers with respect and excellence. That's not a slogan, it's a requirement. Anyone who cannot or will not uphold that standard has no place in this organization." She gathered her ID and debit card, placing them back in her purse. "I'll be reviewing customer experience metrics for every branch, with new measures that capture what our current analytics miss. Expect changes, significant ones." With that, Olivia walked toward the exit, her posture straight and her stride purposeful. Just before reaching the door, she turned back. "And yes, I still want my $5,000. I'll expect it to be processed immediately, no questions asked." By the time Olivia returned to her office, the story was already spreading throughout the company. Her executive assistant, Marcus, greeted her with wide eyes. "Is it true you went undercover at the flagship branch and fired Rebecca Taylor on the spot?" Olivia set her purse down. "News travels fast, and not entirely accurately. I didn't fire her on the spot. I gave her the option to resign." Marcus handed her a stack of messages. "The board is in a frenzy. Thomas Wells has called 3 times, and PR is requesting an emergency meeting. Schedule Thomas for 1 p.m., PR for 2 p.m., and call an all-executives meeting for 4 p.m., Olivia directed. "And I need Sarah Johnson, and the head of HR in my office in 30 minutes. While waiting, Olivia drafted notes for the coming meetings, organizing her thoughts and priorities. This incident wasn't just about one branch or one manager. It was symptomatic of deeper issues within the organization, issues she was now positioned to address directly. Sarah arrived first, followed shortly by Diana Patel, the Chief Human Resources Officer. "I assume you've heard," Olivia began once they were seated. "It's all anyone's talking about," Diana confirmed. "And I've already received calls from 3 board members expressing concern about potential legal exposure." "They should be concerned," Olivia replied, "but not about the actions I took today. They should be concerned about the systemic issues those actions exposed." She outlined what she had witnessed, not just at the flagship branch, but at all 5 locations she had visited. "We have a culture problem," she concluded. "One that's costing us customers and contradicting our stated values. The customer satisfaction metrics haven't flagged these issues," Sarah noted, looking troubled. "Because our metrics are designed to capture what we already value, not what we've been missing," Olivia explained. "Here's what I need from both of you. Sarah, develop new customer experience metrics that specifically track service quality across demographic groups. Diana, I want a comprehensive review of our hiring, training, and promotion practices with an emphasis on unconscious bias and cultural competence." Both women nodded, already taking notes. "And prepare for resistance," Olivia added. "Change of this magnitude will face pushback, both internally and externally." Her meeting with Thomas Wells was predictably tense. The board chairman arrived looking grave, his usually friendly demeanor replaced by concern. "Olivia, what were you thinking?" he asked after declining her offer of coffee. "You publicly humiliated a 15-year employee without due process. The potential liability is minimal compared to the liability of allowing discriminatory practices to continue," Olivia interjected. "Thomas, you supported my appointment because you believed I could lead Pinnacle into the future. This is what that leadership looks like." She shared her observations in detail, watching as Wells's expression shifted from concern to shock, and finally to grim understanding. "I had no idea it was this bad," he admitted. "Most executive teams don't," Olivia replied. "We're insulated from the day-to-day customer experience, especially when we're recognizable. That's why I needed to see it for myself." Wells was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What's your plan?" Olivia outlined her comprehensive strategy: new metrics, enhanced training, revised incentive structures that rewarded inclusive service, and a clear message that discrimination in any form would not be tolerated. "It will be expensive," Wells noted. "Initially, yes," Olivia acknowledged. "But the cost of losing customers due to poor treatment is greater, and the reputational damage when these incidents inevitably become public is incalculable." By the end of their conversation, Wells had moved from skepticism to cautious support. "You'll face opposition from some quarters," he warned. "I'm counting on it," Olivia replied. "Opposition identifies where the problems are most entrenched." The PR team arrived next, already preparing damage control strategies. "We need to get ahead of this," insisted Lawrence Kim, the chief communications officer. "If the media picks up the story—" "When," Olivia corrected. "Not if, when, because I intend to share it." The PR team exchanged alarmed glances. "Hear me out," Olivia continued. "This isn't just an internal Pinnacle issue. It's an industry-wide problem that no one wants to acknowledge. By addressing it openly, we position ourselves as leaders in creating genuine change." She proposed a multifaceted approach: a public statement acknowledging what had happened and outlining specific steps to address it, a series of community forums in underserved areas to gather feedback directly from customers, and a transparent reporting system that would publish demographic service metrics quarterly. "This is unprecedented," Lawrence said, looking uncertain. "So is having a black woman as CEO of a major financial institution," Olivia reminded him. "Let's make the most of it." By 4 p.m., when the executive team gathered in the boardroom, the initial shock had given way to focused energy. Olivia stood at the head of the table, surveying the leaders who would either support her vision or oppose it. "Today marks a turning point for Pinnacle Financial," she began. "For too long, we've allowed a gap to exist between our stated values and our actual practices. That ends now." Over the next hour, she outlined her vision for transformation, not just in customer service, but in every aspect of the bank's operations. Some executives nodded in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable or skeptical. "This isn't optional," Olivia concluded. "It's not a diversity initiative or a PR campaign. It's a fundamental realignment of how we do business. I expect each of you to lead this change within your divisions. Those who can't or won't should consider whether Pinnacle is still the right place for them." As the meeting adjourned, James Reynolds, the chief risk officer, lingered behind. In his late 50s, James was part of the old guard, having joined Pinnacle straight out of college. "Bold move today," he commented, his tone making it unclear whether he meant it as a compliment or criticism. "Necessary move," Olivia replied, gathering her notes. James hesitated, then said quietly, 30 years ago, when I started here, my first boss took me aside and told me there were two sets of rules for customers. He called it practical banking reality. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't have the courage to challenge it." He met Olivia's gaze directly. "I'm glad someone finally did." The next 6 months were the most challenging of Olivia's career. As expected, there was resistance. From entrenched middle managers, from some board members, from industry analysts who questioned the business wisdom of such sweeping changes. Rebecca Taylor did choose resignation, but not quietly. She gave interviews claiming she had been made a scapegoat for institutional policies, igniting a brief but intense media firestorm. Several longtime clients, uncomfortable with the bank's new direction, took their business elsewhere. But there were victories, too. The new customer experience metrics revealed previously hidden patterns of service disparity, allowing for targeted interventions. Enhanced training programs helped employees recognize and address their unconscious biases, and a revised compensation structure that tied bonuses to equitable service outcomes began to shift the culture. Most significantly, as word spread about Pinnacle's transformation, new customers arrived, many from communities that had historically been underserved by traditional banks. Young professionals, immigrant entrepreneurs, and community organizations began to see Pinnacle not just as another financial institution, but as a partner committed to their success. 1 year after the incident at the flagship branch, Olivia stood at a podium in Harlem, just blocks from where she had grown up. Behind her was the newest Pinnacle branch, built specifically to serve a community that had long been banking deserts. Beside her stood her mother, now 70 and beaming with pride, and James, who had been her steadfast supporter through the tumultuous year. Financial institutions have tremendous power, Olivia told the gathered crowd. The power to open doors or keep them closed. The power to build communities or extract from them. The power to reinforce inequality or help dismantle it. At Pinnacle Financial, we choose to use our power to create a more inclusive, more equitable financial system. One customer, one transaction, one community at a time. The applause was thunderous, but for Olivia, the most meaningful response came from an elderly woman who approached her after the ceremony. I've been banking from a shoebox under my bed for 40 years, she confided, her voice quavering slightly. Banks never felt like they were for people like me. But today, I opened my first account. Olivia embraced her gently. Welcome to Pinnacle. We've been waiting for you. 3 years after the transformation began, Pinnacle Financial had become a case study in ethical leadership and inclusive banking. Business schools analyzed Olivia's approach, industry publications featured her strategies, and competitors began, sometimes reluctantly, to adopt similar practices. But the most significant changes were happening on the ground, in communities that had long been financial afterthoughts. In Harlem, small business loans increased by 300% in the first 2 years after the new branch opened. In the South Bronx, homeownership rates began to rise as Pinnacle introduced mortgage products designed specifically for first-generation buyers. In immigrant communities across Manhattan, financial literacy workshops conducted in multiple languages helped thousands of families establish credit and build savings. On a crisp autumn morning, much like the one when she had first stood at that teller counter in disguise, Olivia sat in her office reviewing the quarterly reports. The numbers told a story of transformation. Customer retention up 28%, new accounts from previously underbanked communities up 45%, employee satisfaction scores at an all-time high. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Marcus, her executive assistant, entered with an envelope. This just arrived by courier, marked personal and confidential. Olivia opened it to find a handwritten note and a newspaper clipping. The clipping was from a small community paper featuring a photo of a ribbon-cutting ceremony at a new daycare center in Queens. Standing proudly in the center was Michael, the teller from that fateful day at the flagship branch. The note read, "Ms. Marshall, you probably don't remember me, but I'll never forget you. After our encounter, I went through the remedial training program and learned things about myself I hadn't wanted to face. I left Pinnacle to pursue what I really care about, creating safe spaces for children in underserved communities. The loan to start this daycare came from Pinnacle's Community Development Program. Your actions that day changed many lives, including mine. With gratitude, Michael Thompson." Olivia smiled, touching the photo lightly. This was why she had climbed so high, not for the corner office or the prestigious title, but for the power to create change that rippled outward in ways she couldn't always predict. Later that day, she visited a branch in Brooklyn, this time making no effort to disguise herself. She watched as customers of all backgrounds received the same warm welcome, the same respectful service, the same presumption of belonging. It wasn't perfect, change never is, but it was real progress. As she was leaving, a young teller approached her hesitantly. "Ms. Marshall? I just wanted to say, I'm studying finance at night school, and seeing you as CEO, it makes me believe I could do that too someday." Olivia remembered Eleanor Richardson and her folder of declined loan applications. She remembered her mother counting pennies at the kitchen table. She remembered her first day behind the counter with her too tight shoes and her determined smile. "What's your name?" she asked the young woman. "Aisha." "Well, Aisha, I look forward to working for you someday." The young woman's eyes widened, and Olivia continued, "The path won't be easy. You'll face obstacles I never did, and be spared some that I wasn't. But remember this. Every time you rise, you create space for others to follow. That's not just ambition. It's purpose." As Olivia walked out into the bright autumn sunshine, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The financial system that had once seemed like an impenetrable fortress designed to keep people like her out had been transformed, not completely, not perfectly, but meaningfully, into a gateway of possibility. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Dinner tonight to celebrate the quarterly numbers? That Vietnamese place you love?" Olivia smiled and replied, "Perfect, but I'm buying." Tucking her phone away, she hailed a cab and gave the driver an address in Harlem. Before dinner, she had one more stop to make: the small apartment building where she had grown up, where her mother still lived by choice despite Olivia's offers of a more luxurious home. As the cab navigated the city streets, Olivia watched the neighborhoods change, wealth giving way to working-class pragmatism. She thought about the little girl who had watched her mother count pennies, the young woman who had stood behind her first teller counter, and the CEO who had finally gained the power to change the system from within. The journey had been long, but looking back, Olivia could see that every step, even the painful ones, had been necessary. Every hurdle crossed, every slight endured, every small victory won had led her to this moment, where she could at last fulfill the promise she had made to her mother all those years ago. "I'm going to learn it from the inside, and one day, I'll change it." That day had come. And though there was still much work to do, Olivia Marshall knew one thing with absolute certainty: the fortress walls were coming down, one brick at a time. 5 years later, Olivia stood on a stage at Columbia University's business school, preparing to deliver a commencement address to a graduating class that reflected the diversity of the city itself. As she looked out at the sea of faces, hopeful, determined, ready to make their mark on the world, she thought about the legacy she wanted to leave. It wasn't just about Pinnacle Financial, though the bank had indeed become a model for the industry. It wasn't just about the policies she had implemented or the metrics she had transformed. It was about something more fundamental: the belief that systems can change when people within them refuse to accept the status quo. "You're entering a world of established systems," she told the graduates. "Financial systems, healthcare systems, legal systems, educational systems. Many of these systems were not designed with everyone in mind. Many still contain biases and barriers that limit human potential." She paused, remembering all the times she had been underestimated, overlooked, dismissed. "You have two choices," she continued. "You can accept these systems as they are, navigate them as best you can, and perhaps achieve individual success despite their flaws. Or you can commit to changing them from within, using whatever position of influence you achieve to make them more just, more inclusive, more humane." A quiet intensity filled her voice as she leaned closer to the microphone. "The second path is harder. You will face resistance. You will be told that this is just how things are done. You will be labeled idealistic, naive, disruptive. But I'm here to tell you that change is possible. I've seen it. I've led it. And I've witnessed the profound difference it makes in people's lives." From her seat in the front row, Olivia's mother wiped away a tear, her face radiating pride. Beside her sat James, who had become not just Olivia's husband, but her partner in transformation, using his analytical expertise to quantify the business benefits of ethical banking practices. "Whatever path you choose," Olivia concluded, "remember this: true success isn't measured by the heights you reach, but by how many you bring with you on the climb. Go forth and build systems worthy of human potential, all human potential." As applause filled the auditorium, Olivia knew that her work wasn't finished. There would always be more walls to dismantle, more bridges to build, more minds to change. But looking out at the next generation of leaders, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel often in her career: hope. The transformation she had begun would continue long after her time at Pinnacle ended, rippling outward through the actions of countless others who refused to accept that systems couldn't change. And in that continuation, lay the true meaning of legacy. Later that evening, as Olivia walked with her mother through the old neighborhood, an unexpected shower of rain began to fall. They ducked into a small bodega, the same one where Olivia had bought penny candy as a child. The elderly owner recognized her mother immediately. "Mrs. Marshall, and is this your daughter, the big bank boss? My grandson opened his first savings account at your bank last month. Said the people there treated him like he mattered." Olivia's mother squeezed her hand. "She always said she was going to change things. And look at her now." As the rain subsided and they continued their walk, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a little girl watching her mother count pennies to a CEO transforming an industry. From an outsider determined to break into an insider committed to breaking down barriers. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't always been clear that she would succeed. But standing here now, in the community that had shaped her, seeing the concrete ways in which her work had improved lives, Olivia Marshall knew one thing with absolute certainty. Some systems were designed to exclude. But with enough determination, enough courage, and enough people willing to stand up and say, "This must change," no system was beyond transformation. And in that knowledge lay not just accomplishment, but peace.